Okay, thank you. We'll turn it over to you. I'm going to mute myself and you let me know when you want me to share the screen.
Okay, why don't we pull up the PowerPoint as we get.
Okay, let me, give me a minute.
Well, while you do that, I'll just start. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. As in true form for all disasters, we had our power go out here in Lafayette last night. I guess there was a car that hit one of the PG&E power poles, and the power was out for several hours last night. And then as I'm just getting ready to do this morning, the power goes out again. So having plan B ready to go, Margaret and I talked, and we were going to do it on my cell phone. And in the meantime, I had my husband putting the generator back on again so I could get some power, just like we did last night. But as soon as we got that all hooked up, what happens? The power comes on again. So hopefully it will stay on the rest of the morning. So again, welcome. So if we could go to the next slide. You're muted, Margaret.
Sorry, someone joined as Martinez CERT. If you could just put your name in the chat, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to mute myself and go to.
Okay, I'm Brianna Taylor. I'm with the Red Cross. I'll just give you a quick little background for myself. I've been with the Red Cross since Hurricane Katrina. I originally, back in December of 2004, my family was vacationing in Thailand. And if you remember what happened back in December of 2004, we were there when the Indian Ocean tsunami hit. We couldn't get out of the country. Everything was just pure chaos at that time. And I was so struck by what was going on that after we did get home, 6 weeks later, I went back to Thailand to help to do disaster recovery work. And that was actually the real beginning of the organized, spontaneous volunteers. I went over there without being affiliated with any organization. I just knew I had to go back there and help. I called my brother who lived in Chicago, who is in construction, and I said, Bill, you want to go with me? So he went with me. And we were there for 3 weeks still digging debris. It was just one of the most life-changing experiences. But then, you come home and things somehow go back to normal. And later that fall, we had the largest natural disaster that this country has ever had, which was Hurricane Katrina. So like hundreds of other people, I showed up at the Red Cross office in Oakland and said, I'm here to help. What can I do? And that was the very beginning of my career with Red Cross as a volunteer. I went to Louisiana and have been deployed around the country many, many times. I'm our regional disaster chair. I live here in Contra Costa. Contra Costa is where I love and where I will always be involved and make sure that we are taken care of here. I've been involved with many CERTs and Martinez many years ago when we could still do in person. I did a shelter training for you guys. And I've done many trainings here with La Marinda CERT also. I am just so pleased that all of you have decided to give up your Saturday morning to be here. And I want to thank Margaret, and I want to thank Milagros and Trish for spearheading this training as we move forward. as you'll see, nobody can do this alone. And together we're much stronger than we are by ourselves. So as we go forward, Margaret's going to monitor the chat. And Margaret, if there's anything that I'm leaving out or any questions that come up as we're going, if you would just let me know so we can answer them as they come up. And if there are questions that can wait until later, we'll answer them when we get to a stopping point. Does that work for you?
That works for me. And also Milagros is on this morning as well. So she's helping us to moderate the chat.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So please, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Zoom. If you're not and you have any problems, please feel free to use the chat and reach out to Margaret, and she'll see what she can do. She's been great in helping me with things that have gone on these past particular 24 hours. So use the chat. I've tried to put this together, not repeating everything that you've learned up to this point, but taking it to the next level. But feel free to share your thoughts, ask any questions to clarify what you've learned so far. Keep your mic on mute unless you are speaking. And if you need to step away, just put it in the chat that you'll be gone for a moment so that we don't look for you or call on you or wonder what happened to you. Please do participate. We will do some breakout sessions and some polling to try and keep this interesting for all of you. And I think, I hope you come away knowing more than when you started and feeling confident that if you were called on to work in a shelter or maybe even open a shelter, that you'd be able to do so. So Margaret is recording the session. So those who were not able to participate but have done the part one of our training can join us in virtually with the recording. Okay, so our agenda for today is, first, I'm going to give you kind of an overview and a big context of the disaster picture that we're all looking at, particularly what happened in 2021 and as we go forward. Then we'll get into the meat of what we're talking about. We're going to talk a little bit about safety. And then we'll talk about working in a Red Cross shelter. We'll take a 10-minute break. We'll come back and talk about temporary evacuation points, which weren't, well, they may have been touched on in the information that you had, but we'll go into more detail. And then a little bit about a Red Cross CERT partnership and ways that you might find very advantageous to continue your learning and your training. And then we'll wrap up and then do a few key takeaways from today. Is there anything else that anybody wanted in the agenda that is not there? Okay, if you have any other suggestions, just put it in the chat. All right, so big question is, why are we doing this? I mean, why is Red Cross and CERT doing this together? Well, let me just say, for as long as I have been involved with Red Cross and CERT, even though I am not a CERT member, I've always thought that it's a perfect marriage. We have the same mindset. We're there to help our community. We're there to respond. We've got the right frame of mind to be there when something happens. And you are first responders. You are there immediately when something happens. But then when things start to calm down a little bit, if they ever do, then you're still ready to go and want more. And this is when we as Red Cross could also really use some help. So shelters are one of the places where we can always, we always need help. And depending on the intensity of the disaster, because every disaster is different, we may be responding in additional places other than here in Contra Costa and may really rely on you to help with the sheltering piece here in our county. So that's our big why. And now the next slide. Now let's look at 2021 in context. I think this next slide is fascinating. Some of you may have seen it before, but the US experienced 20 separate weather climate disasters with losses that exceeded $1 billion each in the last year. And that put 2021 in second place for the most disasters in a calendar year. And that was behind the record of 22 separate billion-dollar disaster events that were in 2020. So to me, what really made 2021 stand out was the diversity of disasters that we responded to throughout the country. And I think if you also understand that Red Cross is responding to all of these disasters. I mean, we think of ourselves very local of what's happening right here. But in the past year, we had over 550, I think it was 552 deployments in our region, people that deployed around the country. That's more than one person deploying every day. That's almost two people who deployed every day. Deployments that were 2 weeks in length. I was deployed for quite a while during the summer to the Gold Country wildfires. But if we take a look at the disasters this past year, we had a winter storm, which was the cold wave event, which focused on the Deep South, which happened early in the year. Freezing temperatures, pipes that burst in Texas. I mean, things, cold weather where there was not supposed to be cold weather. We had one wildfire event, and when I say one, that combined wildfires across Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. That's in our Pacific Division. We had a drought and heat wave event, which happened early in the summer, which again was in Northern California, Oregon, and Washington, where in Portland, temperatures reached 116 degrees, unheard of, particularly also in June for that time of year. And those were life-threatening events. We had 2 flood events in California, one in California and one in Louisiana, 3 tornado outbreaks, including the December tornado outbreaks, which were unprecedented and devastating, and we're still in Kentucky responding. 4 tropical cyclones, Elsa, Fred, Ida, and Nicholas, and 8 severe weather events across many parts of the country, including the December Midwest derecho. So overall, these events resulted in the deaths of 688 people, and of course had significant economic impact on the areas affected. In Red Cross, we talk a lot about acute to chronic climate change and displacement. So if we go to the next slide.
I will. And let me just interject for you, Brianna. There are a couple
Sure.
of questions in the chat dealing with the scope of what you're going to talk about. And I think that you do plan to discuss this, but the question came up about what does ongoing training look like and what do deployments look like? How do you handle uncooperative clients? A question about physical requirements to do the work, and what if you're a senior and you have your own health problems, and then a question of liability. I think that you plan to roll off all that in, but I just wanted to put a bookmark there.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I'm just making note of them, and just make sure I do touch on them. I plan to touch on all of those.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll circle you back too.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we used to have disasters that would come and would be just intense disasters. But what's happening now is we have disasters that are chronic and they're reoccurring. So wildfires, if you talk to ConFire, we're always in, or CAL FIRE, wildfire season is always, which a perfect example of that is the Colorado fire down in Big Sur, which just took place and is, I think, 70% contained at the moment. A disaster that we opened up a shelter for at Carmel Valley High School. And again, in January, after the rains that we've had, you don't normally see a wildfire take place. So because of this acute to chronic, Red Cross has been making many changes. And the frequency and the extreme weather caused by these climate changes really has threatened tens of millions of people across the country, and has displaced them from their homes and their communities. And, you know, we see this every day from a small scale to a large scale. It may be a family standing in the street after a house fire, or thousands of families seeking shelter in the face of a wildfire, like we saw in December in Colorado. So the rapidly accelerating pace of this climate displacement has a devastating and disproportionate impact on the most vulnerable communities that we serve, which lack the resources needed to cope with the progressively chronic threat that they're facing. There's been a six-fold increase in the number of large disasters caused by extreme weather in the United States over the past 40 years. More than 40% of Americans, that's around 130 million, live in a county that is struck by a climate disaster last year. Red Cross launched a major relief effort every 12 days this past year to provide shelter, food, and care somewhere in the country. And a family that was displaced by a disaster in the US spent an average of nearly 30 days in a Red Cross supported emergency shelter. These extended stays were largely due to a lack of savings and community housing shortages, signs that climate-driven disasters are compounding the financial hardships of the pandemic. And as I was saying, since the beginning of January last year, we sent volunteers across from our 15 counties in our Northern California coastal region to deploy 552 times. And that ended up being around 70,000 volunteer hours that they used in assisting our neighbors in 41 different disaster relief operations. And that does include the wildfires here on the West Coast. But it's just incredible when you think about everything that's going on. And if you think about the wildfires a year ago that we had here in California, the scope and just the sheer area that they covered was something that we had never responded to before. From Northern California all the way down really to San Luis Obispo, we were responding. And so when you think about something like that, and just like, you know, CERT, I mean, we don't have lots and lots of volunteers. And so you can see when something like that happens, how working together is so important to take care of our community. So once again, I thank you so much for being here. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So, working together with CERT is nothing new for Red Cross. The picture on the left goes back many, many years of when we did a shelter drill with one of the CERT groups. And then last May, Concord CERT teamed up with Red Cross, and we did one of our Sound the Alarm events where CERT taught. We worked with a senior apartment complex in Concord who had smoke alarms, but really had never had any training on what to do if a fire broke out in their apartment complex. So Concord CERT was there teaching the residents how to use a fire extinguisher. We were there talking to them about fire safety. We had giveaways for all of them. And it was a great morning. Of course, it was like 90 degrees out in May, just horrible. I think we left a little bit early because I think we were supposed to be there until 2. We left at 1 because by 1 o'clock, the seniors were back in their apartments taking a little rest. So we were able to get out of the heat, but it was just, again, a great partnership and a great event working together with the PD, with Concord CERT and Red Cross. Okay, next slide. So what I'd like to start off this morning to get everybody kind of loosened up and familiar and working with one another is starting out with a little breakup session. And in this session today, the first one, we'll do 2 today. I'd like you to talk about something you learned about in your training, and that is client first sheltering, which is the basis of everything that we do. So I want you to first talk with one another about what is client first sheltering, why is it important, and then list ways to demonstrate putting the client first when we're opening, operating, and closing a shelter, which are the 3 phases of sheltering that we'll be talking about. No right and wrong answers. We just want to hear your thoughts. If you would choose a spokesperson to take notes, and when you come back to report out, we're going to give you 10 minutes. Margaret's going to put you into breakout rooms. I'm sure many of you have done that before. You will just teleportically be transported into your room. And then we'll see you here again in 10 minutes, ready to talk about client first sheltering.
Now, let me just tell folks that you are going to be magically placed into random breakout rooms. And when it's time to come back, you'll be given an option that says leave room or leave meeting. Please don't choose leave meeting, choose leave room. So here we go.
Okay, Margaret, I'm going to join a room too.
Okay, I will as well. Well, no, I'm not going to. I think I'm going to monitor the rooms. Folks, click OK to join the room. Hi, Warren.
Hey, Margaret, we were wondering nobody wrote down. I thought we only had to deal with the one question about client first, but they say there's more questions to deal with in this breakout. Is that correct?
Okay. So what is client first sheltering? Why is it important? And ways to demonstrate it.
I was right. It is all about client first. Okay.
Yes.
Why is it important?
Why is it important? And list ways to demonstrate it. You really just got a minute and a half, but
okay.
All right, let me try and get back to.
Thanks very much, Margaret.
Sure. I'm gonna, let's see, I do not know how to. I'm gonna leave this room. Leave breakout room. Okay, then breakout rooms. And
Well, as everybody's coming back, I hope you enjoyed that. 10 minutes went by so fast.
Yes.
I can't believe it. We had some great conversation in the group that I was in. So what I'd like to do is, based on time, to start with every group, and if one group would, first group we call on, if you would talk about what is client first sheltering, and then any of the groups, if you have anything additional to add, just unmute yourself and speak out with what additional you have to add. So who would like to go first?
I'll go first, if that's all right.
Great, Kurt.
Okay. So we got pretty much through about 8 minutes before we realized we weren't supposed to answer all questions, just the first question. So a lot of what we covered in this, sorry about that, a lot of what we covered in our conversation really relates to all three. But what is client first? It's treating people with respect, paying attention to their needs, following up on any requests that they may have, respecting privacy, talking to people and engaging them, see what they want, what their needs are, and make sure that everyone has a good experience. And it's important because the clients are there because of some disaster, and so they are in great distress and they need some help. So some of the ways we talked about were asking questions, being engaged with them, talking to them, making a point to get to know them.
Great, Kurt. I'd like to just comment on a couple things you said that were really important. Privacy, and we'll talk more about that. The difference between what a client wants and what a client needs. You know, I used to do this with my kids all the time. Is it something you need, or is it just something you want? I don't say that to clients, but that's how I said it to my kids. And, you know, it is a disaster. And in the very first, 48 hours, it is totally chaotic. And it's about filling their needs. Then we can look at what some of their wants are. But in that very beginning time, it's really what are the basic needs and how do we fill those basic needs? And the other thing that I wanted to comment on, yes, we want people to have a good experience there because it's helpful to them. But also, Red Cross is not a government agency. So we don't receive, well, we receive very little funding from the government. So all the funding comes from the donor dollar. And so it's really important when there is a large disaster, not only does the disaster response cost, but on top of that, we're giving out assistance to the people affected by the disaster. And so that's all dependent on the fundraising that happens during that disaster for that specific disaster. And COVID has made that, has made it more expensive to respond to disasters. And we'll talk about that later. But it's something that we can't lose sight of. And it's really about also how do we take that donor dollar very seriously, and the way that we use it and the way that we spend it. And we have just issued a second round of funding for the people that were affected by Hurricane Ida and also in the Gold Country. And that's possible because of the amount of fundraising that came in that we have on top of covering the expenses. It goes immediately back to the clients or into long-term recovery where we may be funding projects, grants that go to benefit the community. So I just wanted to share that. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is add things that weren't a part of what you read or saw in the video. So I just hope that's beneficial too. Okay, next report out, next group.
So we talked about not just empathy, medical, emotional, spiritual needs, but we also talked about what we need to do to help people. And some of that was just basic things to help de-escalate, like maybe we do some deep breathing, which can change our body's physiology, can give us a moment to pause and regroup and put ourselves in a better frame to help the clients. So we kind of went down that road because we were looking at how can we help them.
Way to go, Carrie, because of with Red Cross, it's how do we take care of our volunteers, number one, because if we don't have the volunteers there to take care of the client, we can't take care of the client. So safety is incredibly important. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But disaster mental health actually came about for taking care of the volunteers, not the clients. It's hard work when you are deployed to a disaster and you're there for 2 weeks and you are working a 12-hour shift. And it's heart-wrenching work and you can't make it better for somebody. You can't give them their home back. You can be there for them, but I'll tell you, it is very difficult. So disaster mental health came about for volunteers, and then we realized it wasn't just the volunteers, everybody needed it. And the other part of disaster mental health is that not only do we have advocates there for the volunteers working with the volunteers while they're deployed, but we have our disaster mental health people calling and checking on the volunteers when they come home, because you're gone for 2 weeks and you come home back into the world as it is. And the campfire was an example of that for me. I came back, it was Thanksgiving time. I had been gone. I had been just, it was so difficult, the campfire. It was one of the most difficult I'd been to. And I think part of that was seeing that number missing every day and the number deceased every day rising. And I came back and I went to the grocery store because we were having people over for Thanksgiving. And I was talking to the woman at the grocery store about flowers. And she said, well, you're too late. We can't, we already have our orders. And I just started to cry. I said, fine. And she said, no, don't worry. I'll do it for you, And I left and went back into my car and I just cried. I have never done that before, but I had felt so guilty also that here I was talking about flowers when people had no home. So, you never know what your reaction will be. So disaster mental health is really there. And, the people who are at home, as loving as they are and as understanding as they are about you going off and helping, they aren't there. They don't know what it's really like. So, they can't understand the same way as somebody who's been there. So I just wanted to share that. That was a great point to bring up, Carrie. Okay, next group.
Hi, we covered a lot of the same ideas about empathy and kindness, and just kind of staying focused on the fact that the clients have been traumatized, like we've been discussing, and that they need to be checked on throughout the day. And in the reading materials that we had to prepare for the class today, one of the suggestions is for us to just be observant. People may not say very clearly, I feel distressed. You have to be kind of looking for the signs, watching them carefully. And I think one of the other things that was really important that came up is if we don't know an answer, to take the client to your supervisor and introduce them, not just, wave at them, hey, go talk to her over there. Just meet those clients where they are and treat them with immense respect and kindness.
Absolutely, thank you. It's so important. I had a volunteer once say, well, all I did today was talk to people. And I'm like, what do you mean all you did today was talk to people? What you did today was a gift to people, and to listen to people. People who have been traumatized need to tell their story, and they need to tell it over and over again. It's how they move past eventually. So, I always think of it as an honor to be able to listen to someone's story. And it is how you identify needs, because they will not always ask. And it may be something like somebody's not eating. Well, why aren't they eating? Well, maybe because they have a special diet and they don't want to burden us with having another thing to do. Well, it's not a burden. So again, if we don't observe, if we don't listen, if we aren't there, we don't know any of these things and we can't take care of them and can't help them. We cannot help them on their road to recovery. So great, Tiffany, thank you. Okay, another group.
One last thing I'll mention from our group, we touched on many of these topics, but one thing I haven't heard yet was how the shelter itself, particularly in the greeting area and the structure of the shelter, if things are set up in a very organized way, where when the clients come in, they feel that they're being considered and directions are clear and that they're in a protected space, that their privacy is being protected just through the actually, how they're being greeted and in the structure itself, so that all the signage is there and so that they really are very clear in an effort in a structural way to sort of help diffuse their anxiety.
Absolutely, Lynette, great. When your world is falling to pieces, to go into somewhere that is orderly and there's structure and there are schedules makes all the difference in you feeling that you have some sense of control when you don't feel you have any control at all. So that's so important. So thank you for touching on that. All right, let me just open it up for any other comments before we move on.
I think that one thing that our group brought up that this is Ginger, no one else did, was that we were very glad to be able to take care of pets for the people, because there's such a low point that they really have that pet that they're clinging to. And so there's a couple of ways that they're handled at the shelters, either a place for the pets separately, or if there's room, the Red Cross allows people to stay in either their cars or their tents with their pets and still get services from Red Cross.
Absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit more about pets this morning too, because pets is one of the biggest topics. And it happens immediately in a shelter. I mean, you don't have any time. I mean, people arrive and they have their pets with them. And what are we going to do? So we'll talk about that in a moment. So thanks, Ginger, for bringing that up. Okay. Is there a time limit after a disaster when victims can register to stay? No. What we see often is that people will go stay with a friend or a family member, but the welcome wears out after a while. And so then they come to our shelter. And it may be, a week after the disaster happened, and they can register at any time. The criteria is that they were affected by the disaster. Now that's a pretty big criteria, affected by the disaster. During the wildfires a year ago here in the Bay Area, there were many of the farm workers down in the Salinas and Santa Cruz area who were very affected by the disaster. They could not prove that their home or where they live was destroyed because they just lived somewhere. And yet we still worked with them and helped them in any way that we could. So, and it is about, one of the things, we have a saying in Red Cross about getting to yes. And getting to yes doesn't mean that we say yes all the time. It means that we help figure out a way to make something happen. It may be by connecting them with a resource or a partner. It isn't always that we're the ones who are doing it, but we're the ones who are helping to facilitate that. And the other thing I just wanted to, the diagram here, equality.
Great diagram.
Equity, exactly. It really is about, we talk about getting to yes or filling client needs, but it doesn't always look the same. And it's not about everybody has the exact same thing. It's really about how do we bring them up to that same level of playing field. And some people need more. So I just wanted to share that with you also. Okay, great. Any last things that anybody wants to share before we move on? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for working in your groups. Okay, let's talk a moment about safety. We are still operating during COVID, and it has been a roller coaster ride for us, as well as everybody who's been affected by this pandemic. When it first started, we were doing non-congregate sheltering. That was during the lightning strike fires, where people were in hotels. We still put people in hotels depending upon the disaster and depending upon their status, their health status. During Gold Country, we were using congregate sheltering. We are back to congregate sheltering. But if somebody tested positive for COVID coming into the shelter, what we would do in the past would be set up an isolation area. But now, again, it's not as many people, but we will, again, based on the situation and the circumstances, put them in a hotel room. We may have an isolation area set up for people who are experiencing symptoms but are not diagnosed, but have not tested positive yet, while we watch those symptoms. I'll give you an example. In the fires last year, when they evacuated South Lake Tahoe, we opened up, the only place for people to go was to Nevada. So we opened up a shelter at the Reno Convention Center. There were several smaller shelters that were opened along in different counties in Nevada going up to Reno. And in Reno, well, in all of our shelters, we ask health qualifying questions before somebody comes in. As the days and weeks went on, we had rapid tests to use with people. We had nurses in our shelters. The state provided nurses for our shelters. And most people who had, who tested positive were in hotel rooms. And as I say, we did have the isolation areas. And people were screened every time they came into a shelter, whether they had been, it didn't make any difference that they were already registered. They were screened every time they came back in. So we were very meticulous and careful about what we did. And I have people have asked, so what is the, did any of the volunteers get COVID? Well, yes, some did. I think the percentage, I wrote it down here so I could share it with you guys. I believe it was less than point, now let me see where I have it. I'll find it in here. I think it's right. It was like 0.1% actually came down with COVID. And those who had tested positive for COVID, clients who were in hotels, we monitored them. We provided food for them. We did all the wraparound services for them. So it was like having, additional shelters that we had to call on. We had them all at the same hotel so that we could watch them and deal with, with their health. Have our nurses there checking on them and working with them and making sure they had everything that they needed. So during COVID, it's a huge undertaking. If we go to the next slide. So a couple questions that you may be wondering about. When am I supposed to wear a mask? If you click on it again. Everybody has to wear a mask at a Red Cross facility or at one of our offices or in one of our service delivery sites. That is the current protocol as of today. So when we're at our office in Pleasant Hill, you have to be wearing a mask. All shelter workers must wear a mask. Okay, if you click again, Margaret. What are the latest vaccine requirements for working in a Red Cross office or on a disaster relief operation, a DRO? You must be fully vaccinated. 2-dose regime, and that has to be completed by February 15th. And you actually have to download your vaccine cards to prove that you have been vaccinated. See, before Omicron, I would have said that your screening procedure was okay. But if it ends up, I can't read the rest of that.
Putting together everyone with a cough who doesn't have a cough after smoke exposure in an area with a big unvaccinated population.
Yes. So in the very screening, we like to have health services right there Now, that doesn't always happen. But, asking those questions, have you been around anybody? The thing is with Omicron, you don't know if somebody may be asymptomatic and spreading the disease, which is why we require everybody also to wear masks in the shelters. Now, we can't force somebody to wear a mask, and that can be an issue. And if something like that is happening, you're going to go get your shelter manager to handle that. There are many different ways we deal with that. I don't know, did that help answer that question or not?
It's more a point. It's like, as with any big agency or organization, just including a skilled nursing facility that is trying to develop policies to handle a rapidly changing situation. It's really difficult. So, I'm imagined that I'm about ready to post something, for instance, that says that CDC and public health are moving towards the term up to date on vaccinations, because fully vaccinated is probably what we now call fully vaccinated 2 vaccines. That's not likely to be the definition of fully vaccinated, depending on what variant and what's circulating in the community. So you will probably, this is just more of a heads up for you.
Yeah.
You will probably start to see the term up to date, and you probably need to go to the CDC website to say what is up to date. And right now, up to date is what we used to call vaxxed and boosted. And this is a seminar I just attended on Wednesday from American Public Health.
Thank you, Karen. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much. COVID and CDC requirements are constantly changing. So it is constantly changing for us. So what I'm saying right now is at this moment, and tomorrow it may be different. So I appreciate that. And we work very closely with public health, particularly here in Contra Costa. We've worked very closely with them throughout the past 2 years on how to handle sheltering. We did an exercise with public health a year ago last June, when you were not allowed to be out there, but it was deemed an essential function by our health officer. So what you say is so true. So thank you very much. Thank you.
And also Nancy has raised her hand. Nancy, did you want to unmute yourself and ask a quick question?
Okay. I just want to confirm in a congregate shelter, there are different areas based on your COVID status. Because I could see somebody coming in and you're asking if they've been exposed, and they, maybe they know they've been exposed, but they don't want to say so because they're afraid they're going to get a lesser care, or I don't know. Does this make sense?
Yes. Okay. Yes, it does. So let me just comment this way. It's no different than when we go into a grocery store. All right, we don't know. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why, as a shelter worker, you are always walking around that shelter. If you hear somebody coughing, somebody that isn't looking well, you're going to take that person and ask them how they're feeling and bring them over to health services to further explore that. As far as different areas in the shelter, everything, and I know it was in the training, we want to, I don't want to say enforce, but we want to make sure people are social distancing, that people are wearing masks, that their nose is covered. Now, eating we do differently than we did in the past, and feeding, we'll talk about that in a moment. And it depends on the facility, what we can do, how we can isolate. And so once again, and what kind of air scrubbers that we can bring in to circulate the air, doors that we can keep open, the time of year it is. At the convention center, we could put people in a whole different area from the general population of the shelter. Sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can't. In a high school gymnasium, sometimes you can do that. You can maybe use another room to isolate people. It's something you need to constantly be thinking of, what is the greatest good for your clientele and how can you make that happen? So, I can't give you one set answer, but what I can do is help you to start to think through the process of how do you make these decisions and these choices. And then you work with your team, with your shelter supervisor or manager to see what you can do. But they need input from you as a shelter worker on what's going on. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. All right. Let's go on to the next slide. This one's just talking about the different masks. We do use, we use KN95 masks for our staff. We also use N95 masks. It depends what we have and what the conditions are. If you are in a shelter in the South where people are not vaccinated, you better believe we're having, our shelter workers wear N95s. If you're taking a look at the situation that you're in and then making that determination. But we're no longer wearing cloth masks. So, nor are we having clients doing that. So you will see some pictures though where that's the case, and it's better than nothing. So it just always depends. Okay, so how effective are the Red Cross COVID-19 safety protocols? What was the results from the recent disaster response operations? If you go to the, all right. So this was, percentages can give you a false sense of security, but our numbers of positive from our current disaster relief operations still remain low. But exposures have risen, which means more days lost from work, waiting for test results and alternate diagnoses. So if somebody's exposed, they can't come in and work in the shelter. That's one of the issues we've had, with, and the exposure may not be from in the shelter. It may be from the hours they're not working, that, they go somewhere to eat, or, they have a day off. So, again, it's something we're learning to, how do we live with this going forward? Because it's not going away. So that just gives you a little idea of where we are. Okay, now we're just going to do a real quick safety poll. And Margaret, will you come back on? Do you want to will you run the poll?
I will. I'm going to launch it now.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay, so
hopefully everybody can see the poll.
Yeah, we can see it. So if you click on the statements which are false and then submit, we should get a tally, and we can take a look at it.
And this is just a commercial too for folks as you participate more in Zoom meetings. It's important to update your Zoom version because sometimes older versions of Zoom don't see poll questions. But we're getting a pretty robust, we're almost done. 75% of the folks have 80% of participated. And okay, 89, 25. Okay, all right. I think we're pretty much there.
Awesome. So,
all right.
Can you share our results?
Yes. Hopefully you can see that now.
Awesome. Okay. So the two false statements are cots should be set up with 10 feet between clients who are not part of the same household. Notice we say household, not family, because a household may consist of many different people. So it is 6 feet between cots, and there's a slide that you learned, and it'll come up again that we'll talk about in a moment. Meals may be served cafeteria style, no more. It's you come and look, the Red Cross volunteer gets what you want, they put it down, you pick it up, and you leave. So no more going through a line, getting a little of this, a little of that, or a Red Cross volunteer giving you a little of this or a little of that. Everything is packaged now. Okay. Any questions on that?
Any questions? Oh.
Okay. Awesome. Great job. Okay, so let's just talk for a few moments about shelters and facilities. So we open up all kinds of shelters and we use all kinds of facilities. And we have a list of memorandums of understanding with several different shelter facilities. They're not legally binding. We don't publish the list. And the reason we don't publish the list is we don't want people going somewhere because they think, oh, that's a shelter, and it's not a safe place to go. So for years, people thought that St. Mary's was a shelter. Well, it may be a shelter, but if the fire is over there, it's not going to be a shelter. So we don't want people just to automatically think, oh, well, that's where I will go. And when things are crazy and hectic and so chaotic, they're not even thinking, they're just going there because that's what was in their mind. So, so those sites are determined at the time of the disaster, and those decisions are made by our government partners with input from us. But technically, it is the government's responsibility for the care and sheltering of their constituents. We are there to work with them and help them, and often we're the ones doing it. So, but they will have some suggestions. We may have a broader picture of what's going on because we know they may see only a snapshot of what's in front of them. We may have a picture of what's going on in the whole area. So we may make other suggestions. We open up, shelters are usually where people spend the night. Evacuation sites are gathering places for people until we open up shelters. Or in the South, where there are hurricanes, or the Southeast, where there are hurricanes, there are evacuation shelters opened where people go until the danger has passed and they can go back home. All right, so just to give you a little broad picture of that, let's go to the next slide. How do clients know where to find shelters? A very good question. So finding shelters, once we've determined where a shelter is, that's one of the benefits of a temporary evacuation point, which we'll talk about after the break. Temporary evacuation points are a way to gather people while decisions are being made, and then to share information. Usually a shelter site will be passed out by the community warning system. It may come out on Nixle. The television will list shelter sites. So there'll be the Red Cross on Twitter, Facebook will list the sites. So lots of places to get that information. I didn't see what that question was, Margaret. What was that last one?
Let's see. Do shelters typically have support from local law enforcement once things settle down to help deal with uncooperative clients?
Once things settle down, we have, it's called LSAP, Life and Safety Program Officers. They are not law enforcement, but they will be assigned to our shelters, and they're there for safety. They're usually, bigger people who go and volunteer in LSAP. And they're often enough to prevent problems, but not always. So we will request additional security for our shelters through our government partners. And that can come in many different forms. Up in Lake County, law enforcement was stretched every year when we were up there, is stretched to the limit. They don't have people to send to the shelters. At one point, they sent prison guards into us in one of our shelters because the prison was not open. It was in an evacuation zone, and so they weren't working. They came in. These guys came in their, they weren't, police officer uniforms, but they had their shirts on. And they really took care of some very difficult situations for us. Most of them were outside. So, and just having their presence made all the difference. We have hired outside security to come in. That's very costly. And again, we're always thinking about that donor dollar. So how can we bring some kind of safety into a shelter? And so we'll work with our government partners to figure that out, because it can be very important and it can be needed immediately. When it's needed, it's needed. You don't always have the luxury of time to figure out how to make that happen. So.
Nancy, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. I'm sad that I have to even ask this question, but do we screen people to make sure they aren't bringing weapons into the shelter?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And in the signs that we put up, it says no weapons, no guns, knives in our shelters. Now, once again, you can imagine, depending on where you are, somebody has a pocket knife. Can that be a weapon? Yes, but it can also just be a pocket knife. So what will end up happening is if somebody has something like that, we'll ask them to keep it in their car, not bring it inside the shelter. Sometimes you don't know. Somebody brings in a backpack. If you're suspicious, you can ask them to open up their backpack. But again, sometimes you don't know. Once again, it's why you have shelter workers walking around, paying attention to what's going on inside of that shelter, and then sharing that information with supervisors and the shelter manager. So when somebody comes into the shelter, we have questions that we ask them on the registration form, and they're given a sheet of, we used to call them shelter rules. We don't call them shelter rules anymore, but they're listing of what's allowable in a shelter and what's not. Coming in intoxicated is not allowed in the shelter either. Bringing in banned substances are not allowed in a shelter. That doesn't mean that somebody won't come in who's, been self-medicating. And again, it's just up to the shelter staff to figure out, is that person going to be a nuisance, or is that person coming in going to sleep and not bothering anybody? Or Is that somebody that you need to say they can't come in because they're being belligerent? Or is this happening repeatedly? So again, you're really looking at the situation. So when I say to you, it's not about black and white rules, it's about thinking about what is in the best interest of the shelter population. If that person who's intoxicated comes in and is snoring so loud that nobody can sleep, and I'll tell you that has happened, you can't have that. So you may find somewhere else for that person to sleep that night, or they may sleep in their car that night. Again, what is the best outcome for everybody involved? So good question. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, so the functional areas in a shelter. And these are all things, I was waiting for somebody to bring this one up. Sexual predators. There is a question on the registration form that says, have you, the exact wording, I believe, is something like, have you been required to register with a government agency? Now, there's a couple reasons why that may happen. Usually, one is has to do with predators. So if somebody says yes, we will ask them to just have a seat, and then we'll have the shelter manager come over and have a talk with them to see exactly what this is. It could be not a sexual predator. It could be somebody is registered because they have had tuberculosis or something. But again, information we need to know. And it can be handled in many different ways. Again, you won't be the one making the decision on what to do. It will be the shelter manager who's making that decision. Sometimes law enforcement will be called in to discuss it. Sometimes they will not be allowed into the shelter. Again, it just depends on the situation. Sometimes some people will say to you, well, what does that mean? Well, if they don't know what that means, that they have never had to register. Sometimes people who have had to register will not check the box, which again is why you as a shelter worker have an incredibly important role, because you're walking around paying attention to what's going on. If there's anything unusual that's taking place. It's also why you don't open up lots of individual rooms in a shelter that can't be monitored by the shelter staff. You don't want something going on behind closed doors that you don't know what's happening. So again, the layout of the shelter is very important. That doesn't mean you might not use a room for something, but you're just not going to use lots of rooms because it's too hard to monitor. Okay. Does that answer the question enough for you?
Yes, thank you.
And could we get everybody to put yourself on mute, please?
Okay. Okay, let's go to, so these are just the functional areas. The lobby we've touched on. You can never have enough toilets or shelters, and you also need toilets and shelters that are available to people with access and functional needs and disabilities. Aside from households that can be together, are males and females otherwise segregated in shelters? Yes. Yes, we usually, when you're setting up a dormitory, it's kind of like setting up a town. You put elderly shelter residents usually in a similar area that's close to the restrooms. You'll put males in one area, single males in one area, single females in another area. You'll put families together in another area. So you need to think about what's the composition of your shelter. And sometimes you won't know that until people start coming in. But you think about the community and what's the composition of the community. Here in Contra Costa, we have a pretty good idea. So if you were working a shelter in Contra Costa, you'd have a pretty good idea of the areas that you would need in a dormitory. So I hope that answers that question. So then there's the dining area. We used to allow food in the dormitory. We don't any longer, although we have, again, because of COVID changing, we were allowing people to eat their meals on their cot because we didn't want them gathering at tables in a feeding area. So they would get their meal, take it back to their cot, have it there. And then we would have, in the height of COVID, we had garbage bags with every cot, and then those would be collected. So again, anything we could do to stop, the disease the virus from spreading. Then you do need special areas for health services, disaster mental health, disaster spiritual care, and casework doesn't have to be in a separate area because they're going around and talking to people. But health services, those are your nurses. Health services and disaster mental health are our licensed volunteer positions. You must have a current license to volunteer in those areas. And those are the nurses that work with the clients. And it's not, we don't address big medical needs. It's things like they don't have their prescription. Their glasses were at home, helping to get all those refilled. For bigger issues, we will bring in public health or nurses, however, we can get them through the county or the state. So, because we do need that assistance. So, and right now, even here in Contra Costa, we don't have a health services lead. The gentleman who was our health services lead has retired, Bert Sibilia, who was amazing. So we're looking for a health services lead. So, just like every other organization and businesses, some of our volunteers, with everything that's gone on with COVID, have decided, it's time to step away, or their health is too fragile that they really can't be out there right now. So, we're doing the best that we can, just like everybody else. So, you just keep working away. Okay, shelter layout. All right, if you click this again. So, quick question. From what we've said, this is an easy answer. Are all shelters laid out in the same way? Go ahead, click it again. Okay, no, they're not. It depends on the building. So let's go to the next one. And Margaret's giving me a heads up on time. All right, I don't know how the time is going so quickly, but it is. All right, so let's talk about animals and shelters. Your shelter is at a church and the pastor indicates that there is no place where pets can be housed at the location. What do? You bring in partners, you work with partners. So let's look at service animals must be admitted into Red Cross shelters. And the Americans with Disabilities Act defines a service animal as any dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability, including a physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disability. Let's go to the next one. So it's important to remember this was a service animal in one of our shelters. They're not pets. We will help the owner who brings that animal, but they are responsible for their animal. And again, anyone who has pets at a Red Cross shelter will make sure there are crates, food, whatever supplies that they need. They may or may not be in a shelter. It's always a call that a shelter manager will make depending on what's happening. Assistance animals are different than service animals. It's a subtle difference, and they may be allowed in a shelter. They usually are, again, depending on the makeup of the shelter. If you go to the next one, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. Oh, go back. So with animals, the thing you want to think about with animals particularly is during a disaster, animals are stressed just like people. And the sweetest, kindest animal may not be sweet or kind because of the stressful situation and may bite. You don't want that to happen in your shelter, and it has happened. There are people who are afraid of animals, so we need to be respectful of that. There are people who are allergic to cats and dogs. We need to be respectful of that. So again, you're going to make the best decisions you can. And again, it depends on the facility, whether they'll allow animals. It depends on your shelter manager, what their stand is on this. But I can tell you from experience here in Northern California, we have had various situations where there have been pets in shelters because if the pet didn't come in, the person was not coming. I remember a time in Lake County in a high school, there were no pets, but in the middle school gym, everybody in there had a pet. It smelled like a menagerie, but they were all happy and everything was fine. And you couldn't have them outside because the temperatures were in the 100, it was 100 degrees. So you had to have the pet somewhere. And animal control up there was 3 people, and there wasn't a lot they could do to help other than bring us crates. So, again, you make decisions based on the situation and what's best for everybody in the shelter. Ideally, you'll have an agency like CART who will come and set up a pet shelter outside of the human shelter, and people can take their pets there. Their pets will stay there. They can go visit their pets. They can take their pets for a walk, but they're not inside the human shelter. I remember one time, I think it was Harvey, we were in the convention center and there were lots of pets, and they had all the pets set up in one of the convention corridors. They called it the doggy dormitory. And the crates were there and the pets were there. So, and again, I mean, it was pouring outside, it was a solution. So it was a way of getting to yes, where everybody was satisfied and taken care of. So again, ideally, we try to develop relationships ahead of time, like with CART. We work with, Peg Gardner and her team. And immediately we will call if we know that a shelter is being set up and ask for assistance. And we will ask for that through at the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, with our government partners requesting the county to assist us with animals. So any questions on that? Okay, so let's move on real quick. 3 phases in sheltering: opening, operating, and closing. If you go to the next, you talked about it in what you read. Just a few key points I want you to remember, and some of these came up already. You can never have too many signs. Signage, rules, post the rules, post schedules. Schedules help bring people a sense of normalcy into their lives again. And you may have people in a shelter that are working, that they need to get up and go to work. They need to have breakfast before they leave to go to work. So you really need to think about what do those schedules look like. A feeding schedule may have staggered times, so you don't have everybody trying to get food at the same time. Okay, the next one. Okay, we talked about the dormitory, 6 feet apart. It should be head to toe, not head to head, except families or the same household. They can have their cots right next to each other. They're the same household. But as far as everybody else, 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet. That's the distance. Okay, more key points to remember. Outside clients, which is a huge thing. In Placerville last summer, there were more people outside than there were inside. And part of that was due to pets. They wanted their pets with them and they were outside, and one of the churches didn't allow them inside. We provided all the services. They registered just like a client inside at the shelter. We asked them to register and they're entitled to all of the services. We include them as a separate number in our midnight count because we are providing them food. And if we don't have a count of how many people are out there, we don't know how many meals we're going to need to serve the next day. So that count is very important. Plus, our government partners want to know how many people are outside. So, and some people, they just, for whatever reason, prefer to be outside, which is fine. The other thing is you can't have too many hand sanitizing stations. You need them inside and outside. You order them. I mean, if you don't have them in your shelter, you let your manager, your supervisor or your manager know that you need more hand sanitizing stations. There should be one before you enter into the shelter. There should be one before you go to get your food, so that people are constantly sanitizing and washing their hands. Okay, next one. We have something called a shelter resident transition team. I don't believe it was in your training, but this team starts in the very beginning, identifying the roadblocks that clients may face on their road to recovery. They will work with them in identifying what their next steps are, agencies that can help them, FEMA, the various resources that are out there for them. And this is even before a local assistance center is opened. Our shelter resident teams are there working with them. Okay, next one. So a client arrives, the shelter, the SRT, they will go and talk to people. They'll do an analysis of what the needs are for those shelter residents, a formal assessment. They'll transition that to client casework. And then hopefully that will help clients to be able to leave the shelter and continue on with their recovery. So this has started, I'd say, within the past 2 years, and has been really successful. Okay, next. So some of the common barriers to people leaving are social vulnerability. There's nowhere for them to go move to. Their home is destroyed. They have nowhere to go. They don't have transportation to get somewhere. And if that's the case, like they could go stay with a family member, but they don't have the bus fare. We need to know that. We'll make sure they get the bus fare. We'll give them the bus fare to get where they need to go. Of course, people experiencing homelessness, they don't have a home to go to. We need to bring in other resources to help figure out where they're going to go next. There are people with mental health and health related issues that we have to figure out how they'll be taken care of so that they can leave the shelter. The shelter is only a temporary situation. Now, temporary means different things. In the campfire, it was months that were temporary. Hurricane Ida, again, it's months. It will be months before many of those people find somewhere else to go. I'm sure in Kentucky, it'll be a similar situation. Sometimes people just don't know what they need to do, or again, lack of childcare. So helping to identify these barriers and helping them to find solutions so that they can move on and get out of the shelter. Shelter is not the best place to be. They need to move on. Okay, next. So if you hear clients when you're walking around talking about they don't know what they're going to do, there's no housing, you need to refer them. Again, if you see clients who are distressed or acting oddly, you need to bring in disaster mental health bring in spiritual care, anything that, any of the resources that are there to help them. And again, you know, you're the ones observing these things. I gave you the Shelter Fundamentals participant guide. It has checklists for all the things, the positions and the things that you need to do. Keep it, it will guide you through that. Okay, let's go to the next one. Just quick thing about registration, wear gloves and masks. We get cell phone numbers, make sure we know about allergies and dietary needs, and make sure that we have information, phone numbers, how to get a hold of people. Okay, just a few quick highlights. Client confidentiality. We do everything to protect that. We don't, once clients are registered, those forms do not stay out in the open. The way we set it up is with space in between, not just for physical safety, but for confidentiality, so that you're not listening to what somebody else is saying. Okay, let's go to the next one. I don't think we're going to have time for this breakout session, so we're not going to have time for this break, so let's just keep going. We're getting there. I wanted to just talk for a moment and highlight clients with access and functional needs and disabilities. Come in all kinds of different ranges. And roughly 1 in 5 people identify with this. If you go to the next one. So if you click again, people with access and functional needs, the next part of this should come up, Margaret.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. You know, we think of disabilities, but that's not AFN. AFN is also people who have limited English or they don't speak English. Older adults classify in this category. And when you think about that, think about an older adult who, I mean, you've seen pictures of those cots. How do they get down and lie down on one of those cots? They might need a different kind of cot that we do have. So older adults, sometimes children, pregnant women are a part of this group. Low income, people who are transportation disadvantaged. So we need to embrace and think about this as a larger group of people. 1 in 5. We go to the next. We are committed to providing services to everybody in our shelter. And the best way to find out, if you go to the next one, the best way to find out is to listen to clients and let their words guide what we do for them. So go to the next one. We often think that we know what somebody needs because they have a disability or their access and have an access and functional challenge. No, we don't know. And it's about helping them to be in control of their lives. And what will that take? It's not necessarily us doing it for them. So we need to ask when somebody comes in, we need to ask them what it is that they need so that they can be independent in this shelter. And then we need to listen to what they're telling us. And that's how we learn more about the needs. And then we can supply the needs. So if you just click on the next part, ask, listen, and learn. You know, it may be someone who's deaf, it may be someone who's sight impaired, many different things, somebody who may be mentally impaired. And so again, don't assume that you know what they need. Ask them what they need, and then we need to figure out how to get to yes. And there is a FAST team, which is Functional Access Shelter Team. I always forget what the acronym means. They're a part of the county, and they often request them into our shelters, and they'll help us determine some of the physical things that we may need. So, okay.
Move past that.
Okay. we may not, yeah. How do you, okay. So if a client requests that they've lost their hearing aid or glasses, our disaster health services will help get that, will help get those items replaced. And there's various ways that it's done. Sometimes we're calling around to their doctors if we can get a hold of them. That's why preparedness is so important. Preparedness training is so important for people. So they know to keep a list of their medications, have an extra pair of glasses, have a go bag that they can bring with them. I can't stress how important that is. Okay. All right. So very quickly, temporary evacuation points. Let's go to the next one. They're a safe gathering area for residents that are impacted by an evacuation. Ideally, they're managed by the county or the city, and they're supported by Red Cross. I will come back to that question. They're usually outdoors. They're pre-identified sites. They're often a large parking lot or an open field. A large parking lot because many of them nowadays have solar panels over them, so they have a covering. Or they're the lower level of a parking garage at a mall where people can stay cool and safe from the elements. They may be open for only a few hours. There's limited resources and staffing. It's not like opening up a shelter. It may begin with, it's a disaster action team. Those are the volunteers that go out and respond to a house fire, an apartment fire, something that may turn into something bigger, but it starts off sometimes small. And it's a safe place where usually the place is designated. It might be by law enforcement. It might be by fire. It's often by law. Okay, next. And sometimes they're good locations and sometimes they're not. I'm just saying that. It's a place to go to wait and see what's going to happen. Will I be able to go back home? So again, a safe place to gather. And we're not giving out financial assistance there. And during the beginning of the lightning fires, we had the Deer Zone fire here. We had 2 TEPs opened for people that had been evacuated from the Marsh Creek area or Morgan Territory area. And one was people stayed in their cars, the other was at a community center. And by morning, we had them situated in hotel rooms. But again, a place, I mean, we didn't know what was going to happen. And so again, safe place to keep people. COVID safety protocols are followed. It's actually easier to follow them there with people staying in their cars than bringing them into an evacuation site. Okay, next one. Let's see. With the cars, we maintain social distancing. If you ever went through a drive-in vaccination site, it's kind of similar to that. We provide basic services. And again, following COVID guidelines. If you go to the next one. So how is it activated? It's usually activated by one of our government partners. And it may be, as I say, it may be law, it may be the county, it may be the city. And from them, they will provide a site selection. We have talked with ConFire about locations in Contra Costa County for mass evacuations, not for like, an apartment fire, but for a wildfire evacuation. And we have identified some of those. And so site selection is usually what they're doing. They're responsible for staffing the site along with Red Cross. They communicate the location of the site. If we need mobile toilets or hand washing stations, they're responsible for providing them. And then security and making sure that there's lighting if it is in the evening or goes into the evening. Red Cross provides screening. Who cleans the toilets at the shelter? We may, it depends. We may have a cleaning group come in that we have hired to do that. It may be mass care people. It depends. That call is made. It depends what's going on at the shelter. Okay, so routine. So at a TEP, we have the option of keeping people there until we know where they can go. We'll bring snacks, water, usually not meals, and provide them an update with what's happening. Sometimes they need blankets, and so we'll have those there also. Okay, if you go to the next one. This was Southern California, where they opened up one. This is kind of what it looked like. Go right to the next one. So again, the layout looks like people drive in, they're greeted. They are directed to a parking area, or some people may walk up if they don't have a car. There's a registration and administration area that is set up. We will go when people come in. If you go to the next one, it'll explain. So what we're looking at is a site coordinator, and these are not all Red Cross people, as you can see in this picture. Looked like we had a bunch of Home Depot event-based volunteers helping at this one. There will be greeters at the entrance and the exit. There will be people in the parking area where people dealing with registration and security. Again, anybody who's working this will be screened upon arrival to make sure that they are healthy. Okay, if we go to the next one. So we'll get information on the site. This is the site coordinator's responsibilities. They'll work with our partners, with our government partners, making sure that the services are delivered. If you go to the next one. The greeter's job is to give a packet of information. It will be a registration form. It might be, if we're organized enough, a parking space number that can go on the car so that we can put a car and a registration form together. Okay, if you go to the next one. So the arrival packet will contain information on what we need from them while they're there. They may choose to stay there. They may choose to leave. They may choose to go to a friend's, not wait to see if a shelter will be opened. Okay, next one. So we'll direct people on, where to park. Again, nobody right next to each other. Bring them things that they need. Getting their phone number is really important because then we can communicate with them by phone. We don't even have to go see them. Okay, next. Again, yeah, it reminds me of the San Ramon vaccination site. Okay, next one. So we will get information, just like I said. It's nice when we can do it by phone. If we can't, we will go to the vehicle, social distancing, provide updates to clients periodically as we find out information. Let them know if the decision has been made for a congregate sheltering, or sometimes it may be made for a hotel. It just depends. And again, we then provide that information back to our shelter team who are working to find a shelter location. How large are we going to need? All of those things. This is what the registration form looks like. It's really very simple. It's just getting basic information. Okay, the next one. Walk-up clients, it's kind of, open up a canopy, social distance chairs, give them a safe place to stay until we know what's happening for them also. Okay, next one. Feeding, snacks, water. That's all we provide. Okay, next one. So the client experience, the client knows they're being taken care of. They get information. They wait for more to hear what's going to happen. And then while they're waiting, we can do the interview process and determine what their needs are going to be. So it gives us a heads up. So either the evacuation is lifted, the client goes home, the best of all situations. We open up a shelter, the client goes to the shelter, or the client finds their own accommodations. And in both cases, their needs are met. And you don't have people just milling around. So again, we screen, we social distance, masks are worn, and we keep clients in their vehicles unless they need to use the restroom or are instructed for some reason to leave their vehicle. It's about being flexible. They're temporary, minimal services, minimal staff, and it's about keeping people safe and informed. So that's what they're about. So that gives you a quick rundown on TEPs. Okay. Margaret, you had a suggestion as we're approaching the 12 o'clock hour.
Yes. So we will, if folks have questions, put them in the chat. After this session, we're going to make available to you a copy of the video of both videos will be available, the afternoon session and the morning, in case something is covered. And any questions that you have that don't get answered, we'll go ahead and we will distribute those at the same time. And Brianna, I assume that if there are any slides we don't get to in the morning session, because we did cover a lot in questions on the fly, you know, Brianna and I will get together. We will record any final slides and we'll distribute that at the same time.
Okay. Let me just mention, there is a Red Cross CERT partnership. If you just go to the next one, we have invited a special way for CERT members to become Red Cross volunteers. Well, or Red Cross partners, they are volunteers. And by doing that, there's a special portal that you register on. You are entitled to all of our training materials. Our training, we do training in a program called EDGE. All of our classes are available to you. If you would like to be deployed at some time, you can go into what we call our volunteer connection and sign up your availability. You won't be bombarded with Red Cross emails because you're a CERT partner, just not a regular volunteer. But it really, if you're interested in doing more in addition to CERT, please come join us. And if you don't want to do that, we're just so happy that you're joining us as CERT when we need something. So our partnership with you, I can't stress how grateful and how valuable, how grateful I am, we are, and how valuable it is to the community. So if you would like more information about this, feel free to reach out to me, email me, call me. I'll walk you through it. I'll talk to you more about it. And please consider it. Okay.
And we'll distribute that to all of our, to Martinez, Concord, and Walnut Creek CERTs.
Thanks, Margaret.
Okay.
Okay, Margaret, anything you had a couple things you wanted to say too?
No, I think we're good. I just want my folks to know we are keeping, versus a program, using a program called merits.com, we are keeping a record for each of you of these special trainings that you've been involved in. So whether it was traffic management, whether it's this training, or if you register as a CERT, American Red Cross volunteer, we'll keep that as well. So in the event of a disaster in our municipalities, people will know who to call and who have specialized training. And you'll see in your email in the next couple of weeks, you'll see evidence of that. You can click on it. You can join merits.com. You don't get any emails from them, but you will have a record that you can keep track of your own training, and we'll be able to see it as well. Other than that, I think, Brianna, we really want to thank you and thank everybody who joined. Thank Martinez CERT and Concord CERT for volunteering so many people. And again, folks, if you have any questions, final questions, put them in the chat and we'll get responses to you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Margaret.
Okay. Thank you, Brianna. We'll see you in if folks can drop off, that would be great. And then you and I can chat real quick.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so folks are dropping off. Terry hasn't dropped off. Becky hasn't dropped. Kurt hasn't dropped off. But anyway, so Brianna, I just think before you and I take a quick break, I think we should. Do you agree we should have people put questions in the chat? Let's address them at the end. Okay. Should we kill the polls and the breakouts?
I think the first breakout we need to do because
okay.
Yeah.
So let's kill the polls. And I think that's it.
Yeah.
And somebody mentioned early on in the chat a private message to me. You know, they understand that the nature of that it's related to a disaster. I thought that it was important that you go over how the nature of disasters is changing, but maybe they felt you could consolidate it.
Okay.
So, yeah. So let me remove these people who are still here and remove this person. Oh boy, I'm blowing this. Anyway, I think there are some people who didn't, haven't dropped off. Anyway, anything you need in terms for the next session?
No, I'll just cut that beginning part.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. Well, I thought it went really, really well.
You have a great group.
Yeah. And Concord and Martinez, it was very helpful. And anyway, that's good.
Okay.
All right. So we'll see you in a little while.
Okay. Okay. Let's see.
Okay. Right. Bye.
Bye.
Let me see.